Moskva was once again subjected to a massive drone attack which paralyzed the airspace over the Russian capital, and some Russian military transport planes were flying right over the rooftops in an attempt to evade the drones. Well, now new details about this attack have emerged. On the evening of September 22, a drone attack began on the Russian capital and the surrounding region. Until morning, reports about the attack kept coming in one after another. At the same time, further south near occupied Sevastopol, the main intelligence directorate of Ukraine carried out an operation at the Kacha airfield. 2 rare B-12S and a Mi-8 were destroyed immediately. I'll explain why this matters. These aren't two separate stories. The attacks on Moscow and Sevastopol are part of the same war storyline. To stretch the nerves and air defense in the rear and, to knock out the eyes of the Russian fleet in the Black Sea. Again, let me explain why I say eyes. And these are two important indicators of how exactly Ukraine is waging an asymmetric war against the Russian aggressor. Let's go over all the details in this episode. My name is Alexei Pechi. Today is September 23rd. Before we begin, let me remind you that on this YouTube channel, almost every day, several news analysis segments about events around the world are released, so that you stay up to date with absolutely all the news. That's why I recommend subscribing to this YouTube channel and liking this episode. It's very helpful. Moscow has endured another night of drone attacks. Fortunately, I emphasize, fortunately for the unwashed Russians, drone attacks are becoming more and more common, and Russian air defense is getting more and more porous. The mayor of the Russian capital, Sobyanin, reported that at least 46 drones were shot down as they approached Moscow. But it's important to note here that the interception stretched from Monday evening all the way until Tuesday afternoon. This was the largest raid on Moscow since the attacks in March. The sky over Moscow was closed, but one military transport plane still managed to get through and scared Muscovites by flying right over their heads, clearly dodging drones. What's important isn't just the number of attacking drones, but also the attack's consequences. Temporary restrictions on plane arrivals and departures were introduced at Sheremetyevo, also affecting other airports in the Moscow aviation hub. Formally is not closed, but in practice there are delays, turnarounds and rerouting. This is an acknowledgement of the vulnerability of the Russian metropolis. In other words, it's impossible to keep the skies over the capital in a completely normal mode when swarms of drones are coming in waves. But it's also an acknowledgement of the fact that even over Moscow, air defense forces can't guarantee clear skies. At the same time, NATO released a statement that tonight sounds like a counterpoint. Quote, Russia, do not be mistaken. NATO and its allies will use all necessary tools for defense and deterrence. We will respond at a moment, in a way, and in a domain of our choosing. And here's a direct quote from the release. This is from September 23, following the Moscow attack and several Russian provocations over the Baltic. I mentioned this in the last episode. I checked the channel and watch it. But this is the background against which Moscow heard the sirens. NATO says they are ready to respond. And here's another European detail from the same day. This is Copenhagen. On September 22, Copenhagen's airport briefly suspended operations after 2 or 3 large drones flew overhead. Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen called this the most serious attack on Denmark's critical infrastructure. But this is yet another sign that the Russians are launching their drones over European countries. Well, apparently they don't expect that the same combat drones will be falling on their own heads. Then the Muscovites start shouting, what did we do to deserve this? So, Ukraine is responding to the residents of the Russian swamps in exactly the same way they treat Ukraine. And the bottom line of this part of the story is that Moscow once again supposedly has no losses, at least according to their official rhetoric. But the aviation hub operates according to the rules of wartime. And the more often we hear about these temporary restrictions, the louder the silence becomes. The main point is the air defense system is being tested for endurance, and Russian air defense is failing this test. This is exactly the purpose of these drone raids, to simply burn through time, resources, and very importantly, the sense of security, so that Russians feel the consequences of this war themselves. Well, that's not all. There's another episode that shows that Ukraine is getting more resources to respond to the aggressor. After all, almost at the same time, on the night of September 23, a special Ukrainian intelligence group called Prizrak struck the Kacha airfield near Sevastopol. 2 B-12 Chaika amphibious aircraft were destroyed for the first time in combat history, and a Mi-8 was hit. According to the main intelligence directorate, a B-12 was hit for the first time. These planes have costly systems for detecting and fighting underwater targets. Company. And this is an important marker that Ukrainian intelligence is emphasizing for a reason. I'll explain why later. The General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine confirmed it the next day. Strikes hit targets in Russia and Crimea, with 2 aircraft confirmed destroyed at an airfield in occupied Crimea. The wording is careful, but the meaning is clear. A series of raids on the aviation assets of the Russian Black Sea Fleet continues. But why is the loss of these B-12S really painful for the Russian Black Sea Fleet? It may seem that these are old planes, but these outdated B-12 Seagulls actually perform very modern tasks. They provide cheap patrols over shallow waters and search for maritime drones. Experts from the war zone note the B-12 is rare, with a small fleet and almost no spare parts left. Its role is especially crucial for Crimea's coastal zone. And now, in the absence of shipborne helicopters and proper UAVs, it's the Seagull that replaces the eyes over the bays and fairways. A strike on 2 active aircraft is a loss, that's surveillance. The GOR eliminated the Russians' eyes on Crimea's coast. Now about the place Kacha, it's the naval aviation base of the Russian Black Sea Fleet, where these amphibious aircraft are stationed. Losing 2 B-12s at once severely reduces anti-submarine and coastal patrol capabilities. Ukrainian naval drones, which have already driven the ships out of Sevastopol, now have a better chance of passing through this gray zone between radar boats and the occasional helicopter. In this kind of game, every loss of equipment increases the chances of a new strike on ships and port infrastructure. Large-scale attacks on Crimea are likely in the near future. What's also important is that GOR highlights the first ever destruction of a B-12. This is a sign that the campaign to neutralize the Russian fleet without an actual Ukrainian fleet has reached the level of systematically eliminating sensors. Before this, GOR targeted radar warehouses, boats, and anti-aircraft missile systems, and now it's striking at rare surveillance aircraft. The General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine says the result is still being clarified, but the event is already drawing reactions from open-source intelligence communities and specialized publications. The context of the B-12's role gives us the perspective we need. According to aviation observers, this type of aircraft has been held together by a thread since the 1960s. But it was in Crimea that, as they say, it was retrained to hunt surface targets, meaning maritime drones. And while Russia is torn between having no analogs and that fence with dashcams they've installed at the entrance to the bays, the destruction of these flying eyes by a surveillance aircraft means one thing: the surface of the Black Sea becomes darker for the Russian Black Sea Fleet, and the maritime drones of the Security Service of Ukraine and Main Directorate of Intelligence will be able to approach their targets more easily. No one remains to watch them. Therefore, the conclusion is Moscow gets temporary restrictions, a long string of interceptions and so on, while Crimea loses the rare eyes of the Black Sea Fleet. All of this together is Ukraine's strategy, to stretch the enemy's air defense deep inside and blind them at sea so that the next strike on ships, depots and bays can succeed. Everything is more straightforward and simpler, so I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments under this episode. Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like. That's all for now. Take care of yourselves. Goodbye, everyone.